Lennon is our county clerk. She was just reelected. She had no opposition, not surprisingly. Um, she is known both in Boone County, as you mentioned, and around the state, because I believe she has a podcast that she often shares with other county clerks in the state. She recently had some notoriety standing up to our unfavorite Secretary of State, and perhaps she can mention a little bit on that. I think we're also interested in hearing, Brianna, what you think about this, the Supreme Court stuff coming up, if they will make a quick decision. And I think we're also interested in that. I don't know where she went to law school. She did work for the state. Yeah, she went here, but she also worked for the state for a while. I guess the Justice Department. She can fill us in more because I didn't look up her biography, but we are very excited to have you, Brianna. Thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you. I am going to share my screen. Is everyone seeing my...
Brianna, make sure your microphone is close to you. You're not as loud as you usually are.
Okay. Is this better?
A little. It sounds a little tinny. I'm not sure it's coming. Which machine it's coming through?
Let me see if I can adjust my settings. I haven't changed anything, so let's do this. Let's stop sharing for a second. See if I can change something else. Is this helping at all?
You're there. It's a little weak and a little tinny, and it seemed like it was louder when you first joined.
All right. Is this any better?
It's about the same.
Okay.
But we can hear you. It's just we have to kind of crank up the levels at our ends.
Well, let me see if I can do one more thing then.
How is this?
You got it. That's it. Perfect. Thank you.
Hooked up a microphone. All right. Let's share the screen then. All right, here we go. And you can always drop stuff in the chat. I will address it as we go so that I don't have to wait till the end for questions. I don't mind being interrupted. But I wanted to give a little summary of the last election, the August election, and then some legal updates and also a couple changes just from legislation, not necessarily from the court cases, but I'll talk about that at the end too. So first, just wanted to go over our primary data. So we had 36% overall turnout, which is significantly higher than, I mean, it sounds sad to say 36% is significantly higher, but it is than our usual primary elections. We had some polling places that really buoyed that number. Some were in the 20s and 10s, but over 50% turnout. Fourth Ward is not a surprise. That was a special election for city council, and so that really buoyed the numbers that we saw. So their overall turnout was significantly higher than the average. But we also track, with data, you can kind of look at it in many different ways and see how it plays out. overall turnout always includes the number of people that voted absentee that live in those wards as well. So Trinity Presbyterian Church had very high turnout, but that doesn't mean that all those people voted there on election day. That's a precinct that also has high absentee turnout. So I'll also note, when I say busiest polling places on election day, we also have slightly different numbers of voters assigned to each of those polling locations. So I know Dave is putting in the election results links in the chat, and you can check those out. It'll show you the number of registered voters assigned to each of those polling places / precincts. And so that gives you some context, because Ashland always is, both the Optimist Club and Senior Center are two of our highest volume places on election day. It doesn't necessarily mean the turnout is super high. It was a pretty average turnout in Ashland, but it was very busy. Fairview Methodist Church is kind of an exception to that because it isn't the biggest polling place, but it was extremely busy. That, again, had over 50% turnout, so that would explain why that is the case. And Lenore has, if you look at the number of voters assigned to Lenore, because of the number of college apartments in that area, there's like 6,000 voters assigned there. So their turnout percentage increasing is very, very low. But the number of actual voters that come to vote there is pretty high. So that is our turnout for this last election. Our absentee numbers also broke some records. So we had not seen as many people voting absentee since August of 2020, which is a really interesting comparison, since 2020 was during the pandemic, when we had to take a lot of precautions and people were really interested in voting before election day for that reason. Now they were just simply interested in voting before election day because it was convenient and because it was available. So I think that's a really strong vote of support in our community, that we have a lot of people interested in voting before election day, and really helps kind of emphasize that providing these opportunities is beneficial because people are using them. So I expect those to go up, but again, it's a little misleading to look at 2022, I will say, because August of 2022, we didn't have no excuse absentee voting yet. We got it after the August 22 election. So you'll see that it doubled in August of 2024. That's not necessarily because it was more popular. It was just available. So these are the primary election comparisons. So you can see that there's been a big difference. I also always like to look at absentee voting, just the no excuse portion. So during the 2 weeks of no excuse absentee, we were very busy every day. For those of you on the call that worked during the no excuse absentee period, you will note that you were extremely busy in the second week and probably remember that experience. There were not lines like we've seen in, presidential elections and things like that, but there was a consistent, steady stream of voters. There were a few times as we got really close to the election, you can see that over 600 once we hit the week before election day. Those were days that sometimes we did have a line that wrapped out into the foyer. I would expect, in looking at the November election, that these numbers will be probably not double, but close to double, just because turnout's going to increase. We continue to hear people that are excited about the opportunity to vote before election day. And I think that this number is only going to grow as we internalize that this 2 weeks of no excuse is an opportunity for people. Finally, I like to do comparisons about our proportion of absentee. And this has been, I think it's really fascinating how consistent our community has been in its approach to no excuse absentee voting, or just absentee voting in general. So pretty consistently, and this goes back to November of 2020 as well, when we had really high absentee turnout. Our major November elections, whether like when they're presidential we're looking at a third of our overall turnout coming from absentee voting. Every other election, it's like 14-15% of our overall turnout. So I just find it really fascinating because there's really no reason for the proportion to change the way that it does. Uh, but it does. And we've been consistent enough that I think that we will continue to see that. So I will be interested in whether November of 26 will hit that 30% or if we might be more in the 25% range. But it's interesting and good for me and good for the office to follow these kinds of statistics because it helps us to plan how many people are going to show up on election day, how big our overall turnout is going to be. And now that we can kind of predict going forward, when we decided to look at like how many polls should we open for August of 2026 and how many absentee locations and things like that, we could look at these previous numbers and they were pretty spot on. I mean, we guessed like 40%, so 36 is a little less than that. But as no excuse absentee went on, it was becoming clearer and clearer that those were the numbers we were going to hit. So I find that pretty cool and interesting. Dave in the chat wanted to know how we compare to other counties. I would say, like, numbers wise, we certainly have more people than our smaller communities, but we also offer more locations and times. So sometimes the courthouses in some of these smaller counties that surround us are only open until 4:30, for example. They're open from like 8:30 to 4:30, so they're not even open until 5. There's also places we're open on both Saturdays and both Sundays of the no excuse period. Many counties are only open for the mandatory 4 hours on the Saturday before the election. So I think in most of the surrounding counties, like our neighboring counties, our numbers are higher in absentee, although we have been being beat in overall turnout. So our election day numbers are not as high as our surrounding counties. We are more like, in terms of absentee voting, we're a little bit more like St. Charles in St. Louis County, where they also have multiple opportunities to vote. And I think some of these larger counties also are embracing no excuse a little bit more. So we're more than the smaller ones. We're less than the bigger ones. We're kind of in this interesting no man's land. But it does make it interesting when we're trying to figure out, like, well, who are we most like? Usually we're most like Greene County, just because of our size. But I have not yet seen their numbers on no excuse absentee voting. So that will be the next thing that I look at. But they haven't finished finalizing everything. The state hasn't certified this election yet. So these are our certified numbers. We're done, but I can't do any kind of county comparisons till everything is up. Any questions so far on the data? All right, I will. Oh, somebody has their hand up.
It's me, Brianna. So that 33% are primarily mail-in ballots, so would be heavily affected by Trump interfering with mail-in ballots for the November election, right?
No, these are absentee turnout is not we are like 80% to 20% in-person absentee voting. So our mail-in numbers are very, very small. So for example, like for this election where we had 7,683 people vote absentee, only 1,100 of that was mailed in. Everybody else came in person.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Last statistic before I just talk about stuff to prepare for November is our provisional ballots. We had 8 yellow ballots cast. Yellow provisional ballots are for people that we aren't sure if they are eligible to be registered, or they might have missed a deadline. They might be registered in a different county. They might have not realize that they weren't registered and thought that they had registered. All of those are reasons why a voter would get a yellow provisional ballot. 8 of those were cast, 3 of them were counted by our wonderful bipartisan verification board. And then blue provisional ballots are for those individuals that don't have a Missouri driver's license, non-driver's license, or passport, or federally issued ID, like a military ID. So anybody that has an out-of-state driver's license or no ID at all, those people are offered blue provisional ballots. We had 54 of those cast. They are checked by the bipartisan verification team to make sure that the signatures match. We already know, and we double check when we're going through, that these are registered voters. These are not people that don't show up on the voter roll. They're ones that everything is correct on their voter record. They are at the right polling place. They are supposed to be voting. They just simply don't have an ID that is valid under the law. So 52 of those counted. The ones that didn't count, one was not at the right polling location, so we couldn't count that one. And one had a signature mismatch. So like previous elections, we always see a much, much higher proportion of blue provisional ballots counting, which makes total sense because the yellows are literal eligibility questions. So they're often given out as a last resort. It's not something that we expect that many of them will count, but it's always nice when we find that there are reasons to count them, and so we get 3 of them in this election. So these were the things that as we were going through certification and we shared, given how close Proposition 1 was in the city of Columbia, shared a lot of information on our social media about all of the parts of the process after Election Day that have to happen for things to be considered certified. These provisional ballots are a big one. Another thing that happens after Election Day is that any of the ballots that have not been accepted by the tabulators at the polling place, and that may be because a voter double voted on something, like they filled in 2 bubbles and then they cross it out and they say, oh no, shoot, I didn't mean that one, but they don't go back to the polling to the election judges at the polling place and say, hey, can you spoil this for me? I need a new one. They just put it in hoping it'll count anyway. It's not going to, obviously, because it's got errors on the ballot. Those get put in a separate slot on the tabulator, and they get brought back to our office. And at our office, during verification, they're recreated. Usually the bipartisan teams will look them and say, oh, that voter was super clear that they meant yes, even though they marked yes and no. They circled the yes. They made it really obvious that they really wanted the yes. And so they will duplicate the selections on that ballot onto a fresh new ballot that can be read through the tabulator. So we had 18 of those that we had to deal with on Election Day or post-election during certification. And then we also had 2 military and overseas provisional or overseas absentee ballots that were cast. So we had a total of 75 ballots that during the certification process were added to the overall results. Those results, once they're certified, they're up on our website, and Dave has linked to them. We have them in both summary format and precinct format. So if you want to do your own data analysis, it is available. ABC 17 did a pretty good one of Proposition 1. But the other thing I want to note that I don't have in this presentation, but is extremely interesting, and I think probably something that as a political party is interesting to note, is we had significantly higher proportions of people choosing nonpartisan ballot styles in this election. If you worked at a polling place, I probably visited you to give you more nonpartisan ballot styles because we ordered what we thought that we would need. And it turned out way more people than usual wanted to pull a nonpartisan ballot instead of a party ballot. So we had 13% of our overall, it's on the results page. It'll show the breakdown of how many people pulled Republican versus Democratic versus Libertarian versus nonpartisan. Double-digit nonpartisan proportions for these ballots we have not seen before. So I think that there's probably 2 reasons for it, just based on my anecdotal, being around voters during no excuse absentee voting, hearing questions that we got in the office. One was that there were individuals that were totally adamant they did not want to have anything to do with the party, even when explained to them that it does not affiliate them, it does not add anything to their record that says that they are part of that party. It is simply a selection they are making on election day. They wanted nothing to do with the party, any party at all. So they voted nonpartisan. And then the other thing is there were just so many people brought out specifically for the constitutional amendments that a lot of folks only knew that the constitutional amendments were on the ballot. And when asked about what ballot they wanted, didn't really even realize there were candidates running. So that was really interesting. I don't know what that says about what we'll have in future primaries when we have the nonpartisan style available. It's truly only something that happens every 4 years when we have a primary. So it's kind of hard to tell for future elections if that means it's going to continue happening this way or if people go back to the normal thing. But I think it's partly a consequence that we had the higher turnout as a result of the amendments, which brought out people that wouldn't normally vote in a primary election. And so if there are no other constitutional amendments on future primaries, there probably won't be that many nonpartisan ballots being pulled because it'll only drive out the people interested in voting in primaries. So those were all the kind of unique things that happened in this election and the numbers for them. Does anyone have any other questions about this particular election before I move on? Any concerns or issues that anybody saw? I always like to get feedback. Somebody in the comments said they're frustrated by the local news anchors saying previously uncounted ballots were counted during certification without explaining what they were. Yes, I agree. For one of the first times I was frustrated with the way that the coverage of the certification process was a little more like it felt a little more clickbaity than it usually is. Usually there's a lot that's like, hey, here are the results. We'll do a little analysis at the end. This time everybody seemed hyper fixated on the margin and whether the margin was going to flip. And I had every news reporter asking me when we were going to get certified, how the process works. And I wrote it down, what's on social media, to try to explain to everybody all the different parts of the process. I still had people confused about why it was a multi-day process, wanting to know, like, and I was like, well, I can't guess how many military and overseas voters are going to send back their ballots within the period of time between Tuesday and Friday. We had 82 outstanding. We could have gotten none. We could have gotten 50. It was literally impossible to know. And I think that uncertainty does breed, Kathy mentioned election conspiracy actors could make the wrong conclusion. It is unfortunately one of those areas where that uncertainty can be filled by people starting to conjecture about certain things. But everything has worked this way forever. The deadlines for things, the fact that the military and overseas voters count, those have been in effect since 2014. We've had the process that we do for certification has not changed in 20 years. So it's just interesting what people want to consider to be coverage. One question is, one of the TV stations had an early report they later corrected about leading by a wide margin. It is possible. I haven't looked at the specific absentee results, but the way that we do the election night results is that the first batch always includes absentee. Usually it's just absentee because we're still waiting for the polling places to come back. Once the poll workers start coming back, then all of those USB sticks have to be imported into the tabulation software. If you can imagine that most people are coming back around the same time, we're going to have like 40 USB sticks in the first batch of things that need to get processed. It's literally sitting in a computer, plugging in the USB, waiting for it to load, taking it out again, putting in the next USB, waiting for it to load, taking it back out again. And that it is weighing, stopping that process so that instead of uploading the USBs, we are summarizing and creating a result, which takes about 15 minutes. Do I want my staff person that's doing that import to stop every half an hour just so that we can have updated results, or do I want him to get all of them in as quickly as possible, even though it delays, like there's no way to do this where I can say I'm going to release one batch at this time and one batch at this time. I could do that, but then some of the batches might be the same. If I don't get poll workers that come in between 7:45 and 8 o'clock, then I'll put out another update, but it'll be the exact same update I just gave. So it's tricky. I don't know that there's any great way to do it, because I know that the other thing that we're up against is the news and the decision desk just calling things. So while we were waiting for the poll workers to come back, I was watching the news coverage that called all of the races in Boone County. And I was like, I literally haven't reported any results. They're not on our website. We haven't gotten them back from the polling places. So they're doing it based on their modeling, which in most cases is accurate. So that's fine that they're using, whatever they do for their demographic modeling and their expected results and turnout. But it is really hard sometimes because I know that people are seeing those results being called and then they're looking on our website and they're not seeing what they are hearing about. And I can't really account for that because unfortunately, people that run decision desks really like to do that. All right, so I am going to turn now to updates for November because there's two that are really important legislative changes that I want to make sure everybody knows. And then I'll give you kind of a brief overview of the two legal cases that are happening right now. So House Bill 1871 was the big omnibus election bill that the Clerks Association worked with Peggy McGaugh on and Sandy Crawford and got across the finish line this year. So exciting. It was exciting for us because it included a bunch of little administrative things that helped us do our jobs better. And then it also included some things that help voters. So the two things that are going to impact people, and especially I think anyone doing voter registration, is that previously, and this bill, just so you know, this bill was passed in this session, it's signed into law. The effective date of all bills is August 28th. So this was not in effect for the August election because it was before August 28th. But starting August 28th, these will be the new law of the land. Up to this point, if you came into our office to vote absentee and you only had an Iowa driver's license because you just moved here, but you were registered to vote and everything was fine, we could not give you a blue provisional ballot to cast. You would have to wait till election day, go to your polling place on election day, and cast a blue provisional ballot. That really sucked for people that were like, hey, I don't have an ID, but also I'm going to be out of town on election day. We could not do anything for them. So this way, we'll be able to issue blue provisional ballots during absentee voting. I don't think we'll see very many. It's usually a pretty small amount, but it is now available to them. Secondly, and I think most relevant to like getting out the vote and the voter registration drives that everybody will be doing going up to November, is that individuals can register to vote now and vote while they're on probation and parole for felonies. That is a huge change because a lot of people didn't even know that at any point after getting a felony, they could vote in Missouri. But now, as long as they are out of prison, they are able to register to vote and vote if they have a felony. The caveat and the implementation challenge that we will have, and I'm not sure how advocacy organizations are going to deal with this. I know that some like Voter Protection Coalition has been talking about these things. There is a group of felonies that is not the case for. Now, these felonies, if you look up what these chapters are generally things like murder, domestic violence, things that are like physical danger type of felonies. But we don't have access to why somebody has a felony as county clerks. What we get information from is the Department of Corrections through a data flow that comes through the statewide voter registration database. So we can query to see if somebody is on the Department of Corrections list, but their list up to this point has included anybody serving on parole or probation for a felony, or anybody that is in prison for a felony. So they need to update their data flow. Otherwise, everybody is going to still show as not being eligible to vote, even if they're on probation or parole, because that's what their data flow has been. And their data flow hasn't been touched in over 20 years. So the state will have to deal with that side of things. The other side of things at the county clerk's, like what's available to us as far as if somebody comes in to register to vote and they pop up on the DOC list, we won't have anything that voter can show us that proves that they are not on for one of these felonies, because nobody makes documents that say, here's the statute that I have my felony for. Like, they have a felony, they don't have a felony. It's a class A, it's a class C, whatever it is. And even if I go onto CaseNet, because I happen to be an attorney, and look at what this person has been charged with, it's really hard to distinguish from CaseNet, and I don't have criminal legal training to be able to see, okay, well, maybe they were charged with one under Chapter 566, but maybe they pled it down and their actual felony ended up under a different chapter. Like, all these things are the nuances of this thing going into effect. So I'm going to do my best to get as much information as I can from the state and the Department of Corrections before this thing goes into effect. But I know that right now, the headline everybody's excited about is people can register to vote when they're on probation or parole. Yes, they can. But we need to figure out how we're going to do this that doesn't hurt voters and doesn't make it impossible for us to actually accurately do. So anyone have questions about that? Because I'm not sure what all of the information out in the world is. I just know this is technically what the law actually says.
This is Mari. I would just say I'll bet the voters themselves or potential voters themselves don't know what chapter they were convicted under.
Probably not.
Yeah, it's a real dilemma.
Dave asked, can I ask the prosecutor what the nature of the felonies might be? I probably could, but they're only going to have information about what was in Boone County, and these are people that get felonies all across the state. So they don't necessarily have a Boone County felony. They may have been charged in Sheraton County or something like that. Especially for ones that, like, the probation and parole period is 5 to 10 years. They might have done something literally 10 years ago. And up to this point, we would have not even been able to register them until they were completely done. But now they can. They're not going to remember necessarily without looking through a bunch of paperwork. And the prosecutor won't either to look back for 10 years. So it'll be tricky. I'm really holding out some hope that we can come up with some kind of situation with the Department of Corrections providing us information.
We have a hand raised by Elena.
Hey, this is Elena. Hey, I used to work for Department of Health and Senior Services long ago now, and they had several MOUs, memorandums of understanding with Department of Revenue, and so I'm sure that like the county clerks should be able to have some kind of a agreement with the Department of Corrections or somehow with the court system so that you are able to access what it is this person's felony conviction is. while they're on probation or parole. It should be doable, but that's going to be a slow process because I know all state agencies is really slow to work these things out. But there should be some electronic means to make this easy. There should
So,
be.
so there is already. That's the MOU that they have with the Secretary of State's office. What the
Okay.
DOC needs to do is update their data that they're providing through that MOU. So DOC really doesn't have to do anything different than what they're doing except change what information they're giving to us. Instead of giving the Secretary of State office everybody that currently is serving on probation and parole for a felony, they can simply give us everybody that is only serving probation and parole for these particular felonies. That's it. That's the only change that has to be made.
So
It's
that
just,
sounds like it should be easy, but I'm sure it's going to be tricky.
yeah, and it's unfortunately something that the county clerks can lean on the Secretary of State's office to try to get this taken care of quickly. And I know the elections director there is very interested in taking care of it quickly because the secretary himself is not, involved in that day-to-day kind of data flow type stuff. So I have optimism that it'll be taken care of, but it will require both IT departments to work together on the data. But fortunately, the MOU already exists.
Oh, perfect. I have a follow-up. I'm on the group called MOCLA, Missouri, Mid-Missouri Civil Liberties Association. Dan Beats is the president of that group. And I'm wondering if you could share this particular slide with us.
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Let me make a note. I'll send it to
Update.
Dan.
Maybe my question overlaps with what Elena was asking about, but what I was wondering if the Department of Corrections officials and officers and probation officers have any obligation to inform the people they supervise, the people that are getting out on probation and that are on parole,
No, that's a great
that they
question.
have a right to vote.
Yeah, so that is a great question. The statute does not make them have that right. So it would be a policy decision that they would make, although I have talked locally to our local probation and parole office and am going to ask them about that. But they do, so when they come off of probation and parole, they have always been including a voter registration form in their packet. So they provide the information to them. Where I think they're going to have to figure out on their side of things, this makes sense, is at what point in the process do they provide somebody with that voter registration? Is it their intake into probation and parole? Is it when they decide that they're like onboarded? And a lot of the probation and parole offices don't necessarily have the, I mean, I know from Department of Revenue and DHSS where they're required to have experience and like explanations of voter registration. Probation and parole has not had that requirement. So I anticipate there will be a lot of folks that are either looking for guidance from either the Secretary of State's office or their local county clerk to figure out like, well, what should we be telling our clients? Like, well, if they're serving probation and parole for anything other than what's on here, then they can register to vote. But if it's one of these chapters, then they can't. So yeah. I feel still optimistic about it. It's just that I get worried when I see the broad stroke things that say, hey, everybody can register to vote. Like, yes, you can, but I don't want people to mislead anybody. Like, the headlines seem very misleading. So I just want to make sure and try to do my best to make sure that we're providing good information. So we'll be updating all of our, we have some PDF posters on our website and things like that. We'll update our records and outreach materials so that it reflects this. I'm hopeful that the implementation will be smooth. All right, so the last two things, which I know that everybody has been following, are the court cases that are currently in circuit court and expected to go all the way up to the Supreme Court at some point. First one, Von Glahn versus Hoskins. I put those numbers in there, so if you like to get on CaseNet, you can look up the CaseNet number. This is the case that is specifically about the redistricting map, and it challenges the Secretary of State's lack of certification, the certificate of insufficiency for the referendum petition. You may have seen already that the Supreme Court has sent a letter to the circuit court judge that will be hearing this case next week. This case is set for a full trial on August 19th, on that Wednesday. And after that point, however fast they make that decision, it'll get appealed to the next level. That case also has the Republican National Committee as an intervener. So it's not just the plaintiffs and the state. It is the plaintiffs, the state, and the interests of the Republican National Committee. So all three of those will be duking it out at the trial. From my perspective, and this, you can take it with a grain of salt, but this is my view of the three options, and I do not know how likely any of these are, but there are three options that can come out of this case. The first is the state wins, and this is if it goes all the way through. So let's say it goes to trial, doesn't matter who wins, gets up to the Court of Appeals. The Supreme Court can say, yeah, the state's right, it's unconstitutional, nothing can happen. If the state wins, obviously the map stays in effect, and the referendum does not go on the ballot. Second thing, the court could say, nope, state's not correct. This thing is fine. It should be certified. We will certify it. It will go on the ballot in November. However, it is too late to go back to the old maps because we're too close to the new election. So we use the new maps for the November election and the referendum appears on the ballot. That's the second option. Third option is the court says, yes, the referendum should go on the ballot in November, and because of our previous decision, the map is on pause and will not go into effect for November. If that is the case, if that is the decision that they make, the next two choices they will have are, do we redo the primary? And if so, when? How do we do that? Or what do we do with the candidates that won in these districts? Do we just say, you're still the primary winner for District 5, but the boundaries of District 5 have changed? I don't know what the likelihood is of the court deciding that. But those are all options that are on the table right now. From the timing perspective of things, the certification of the August primary is on August 25th. Like, that is the last possible day for everything to be finalized for the November election through the regular chain of events. So if, for example, well, not for example, it's for true, the Boone County Commission is putting Proposition L on the November ballot. The paperwork for Proposition L is due to me by August 25th. So all of those things, those are just like, that's the first deadline in the process of getting ready for November. The second deadline for getting ready for November is September 8th. September 8th is the deadline for a court to add or remove or change anything on the ballot. So it's not that there was a situation where the court loses jurisdiction and can't make any decisions anymore. It's that September 8th is when the court has to have made some decision. And if they don't make a decision, then it's like nothing happened at all. So if the court doesn't make a decision by September 8th, it's like nothing happened and we move forward with the new maps and the referendum not on the ballot. So that is the absolute drop dead date for anything to change. That applies to both of those. So I'll jump really quick just since we're talking about timing. The Harris case is about the initiative petition amendment that the signatures were submitted for in May. And those have been checked. in both situations, by the way, the county clerks checked the signatures for all of these. So we checked thousands and thousands of signatures for these things. In the Harris case, what the Secretary of State's office is saying is the content of the petition itself is not constitutional. That is a completely new argument that a secretary has never made before. And I can say in this case, I do feel that I do feel like I have a little bit of understanding of this one only because there have been numerous cases where the court has said, we're not going to nobody should be making determinations about constitutionality of a petition before the thing even gets to the voters, because why would we waste judicial resources litigating the constitutionality of something that may not pass? Totally reasonable, makes a lot of sense, has been the way that petitions have been litigated for years and years and years. So if this gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to make a determination about whether the secretary can make a constitutionality claim at this point, it's pretty likely that the Supreme Court's going to say, no, not just that you don't have the power to do that, but it's too early to do that. We've made it very clear that the thing goes on the ballot, and we'll talk about the constitutionality later. So I will not be surprised if that is a little more cut and dried. It goes on the ballot or it doesn't go on the ballot. Again, we'll know by September 8th. That one is set for trial on Tuesday. That one is just the plaintiffs and the Secretary of State's office. Nobody else has intervened in that case. They're not interested. So if that's the case, we will have that amendment on the ballot as well as Amendment 3. And the referendum is a lot more complicated. But no matter what, we will know the answer by September 8th. The other thing I want to point out too, because there's been some, like, if you think back, I'm sorry, I'm killing all of our time. Is this helpful? Okay, cool. So thinking back to May, when I sent the letter to the Secretary of State's office, where I had mentioned that this was going to be a problem, and oh, here it is being a problem. The other elements of that is in the statewide voter registration database, which is where voters are tied to their new districts, despite the fact that since that map got passed, everybody kept saying it was in effect, no voters up until May 15th were tied to their new districts. If you went into the voter registration database, which is the source of truth for us to create our ballots, to manage the election, to send out absentee ballots, all those things, everybody was just tied to their old districts. Finally, 2 days after I sent the letter in May, the Secretary of State's office administratively added the 2025 congressional district as like a definition. So it was a blank definition. Every county had to go in and assign manually all the precincts and addresses to the new districts so that they would exist. So now every voter is assigned to both their old district and their new district. We did not overwrite the 2022 district maps. Everybody is still tied to those addresses and those precincts. So at this point, there's really administratively nothing that needs to be done on our end other than just toggling which district we're going to use. So when I created the ballots in August, I said, I'm going to use the 2025 districts. In November, if the court wants it to be this way, I could say I will use the 2022 districts. It is no additional work. It is not anything that we need to change. It is a demonstrably good thing that we kept both of them because they were both in play. And if you go on our website or the Secretary of State's website, you can see both of your districts because they're in your voter file. So the one thing that I want to make sure that people understand is that it is not something that would require a bunch of effort on the clerks. So if you hear of somebody saying, well, administratively, this is just not possible, it's not true. It is possible. Local election authorities can do it. The counter that people keep bringing up is, well, what about the candidates? Like the candidates filed in their new districts. The candidates ran in their new districts. They won on a primary in their new districts. Those are all valid complaints. Those are all valid concerns that have been brought up in previous litigation. There's a right, you have constitutional rights as a candidate as well. those will be brought up, those will be discussed. But up until this point, the concerns I have raised and the concerns that I have cared about have been about our ability to even run the election. I am convinced and sure, because I did the work to make sure that we can run the election no matter what. This is not something that's going to prevent us from running the election. Everything is cool from that perspective. We are now just waiting.
I see one very general question from Al or Mary Jo. It's further up.
Oh, yes.
You've
When you
talked about this
interact,
before. Yeah.
yeah. And that's a great question, because we do have 116 local election officials, and I'm only one of them. I would say I find that they, well, I'll kind of use this as an example, which is going to sound funny, but of the 116, there are, I think, 9 elected Democrats, and everybody else is a Republican, aside from the boards of elections in the urban areas. I consistently am still asked to be the one that provides legislative information, train people on how to read laws, provide people best practices. I'm on the executive board, and never have I ever faced a situation where somebody has said, I don't believe you, you're a Democrat, or, oh, I don't think that we should do that because Boone County does that, and that's just not something that we want to emulate. We are still, I mean, our county is still looked at as a trusted place that if somebody has a question about how an election law should be interpreted or how a voter can best be served, we get asked that all the time. And not just me, like my staff as well, the people that do absentee, the people that do election judge stuff, like we field those questions. So I think, I mean, I love working with my association. I think that they're all people that are doing the job for the right reasons. It's interesting because so many of the largest group, most of them are third class counties. Third class counties have to, as clerk, be both the budget officer and the election official. So a lot of them ran just because they have financial backgrounds and they wanted to be budget officers, and they have come to love elections. And I think that's really fun and cool. So I feel good about them. Where we do run into issues, and not just like in this state, I'm saying collectively as an election group, inexperience and turnover has really been a challenge. So it's been far less about party and more about like, this person didn't even know this law existed. This person has been in office for 6 months and just made a mistake. Like those things happen. And we do our best. I think our association is really stepping up to that to try to do more trainings and more mentorship. But generally what I see when somebody's in the news for something where a voter is like had a bad experience or something else, I've generally talked to that clerk before, and it's usually a situation where they didn't realize they needed to do something or they misinterpreted something. And they won't do it in the future because now they've learned.
There's some new messages. One by Peter Schneeberger. Complicated a little bit there.
Okay. In some state, they cast the ballots and then they canceled the races and reran them. For the 6 congressional district races, I assume what you're talking about is you could take the precinct results of this election and say, okay, well, based on the precinct results, for example, precinct 1A is in X congressional district, but on the old maps, it was in this other congressional district. So let's just apply the votes to that. There are ways, if we had a different, it kind of backs all the way up to the way that we create our ballots in Missouri. It's not consistent. Not everybody uses the same machines. Not everybody uses the same software. And because of that, there isn't really a way to just like turn off races or turn them back on again if they weren't programmed like that at the start of the election. So I suppose if you wanted to take all of our ballots and recount them and reprogram things to try to figure out how to put them in different buckets, you could. But many of the states where you see that happen have like super defined precincts and the results that go along with them. If you look at our precinct by precinct results, or even these, this is an example of why it might not be possible. 4C and 4D are together at Trinity Presbyterian Church. 4C and 4D are geographically two distinct precincts. For the purposes of our results, they are one precinct. We cannot split out the results any more granular than 4C and 4D tied together, because that's how we created our ballots. So there's no way for me to say, here's how 4C voted, here's how 4D voted, unless I created ballots, one for 4C and one for 4D. And if I do that, sometimes within 4C and 4D, there are then other splits. And so there might be 4C styles 1, 2, and 3, and 4D style 1. So all of that is to say, some states would have required me to do that. Virginia, for example, does require everybody to do that. And so in those states, they have 500 different ballot styles for every election, and it's not abnormal for them to do that. We have the luxury of not having to do that. We can create more efficient ballot styles, and so we do. So it makes it more complicated to do things like canceling races and rerunning them.
I'm
It's a long-
essentially asking whether we could just have a special election right here, right now, first couple of weeks of September, and then have a very short time before the general.
Oh, yes, we could do that. Sorry. I was all about data. But no, yeah, if the court ordered us to have a new election, it would just be on the congressional districts. It wouldn't be anything else. Everybody would just have a ballot with one question on it.
You didn't mention that as one of the three available options. That's why I'm confused.
Well, it's the option if it's the last of multiple options of if the court decides that it is early enough to go back to the old maps, they will have to decide how they accomplish that. And that will be either saying the people that won the primary are just in their new districts, or we do a new primary to put people in their new districts.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's one of the reasons it's so convoluted. And Kathy said, yes, in November 24, 68% of voters voted. Yes, they did. Presidential elections, we get closer to 70%. I wish that we did all of the time, but unfortunately, we really only hit that when we're around presidential election time. Elena's
Okay.
got a question?
Yeah.
One
Any
last
other
question?
questions for Brianna while we have her? I know you're all thinking about elections and what are problems.
Hey, David, I do have a question. This is Elena. And my question is, Dave Taylor said something about if you want to meet and enjoy the company of people from other parties, become an election judge. He's never met a poll worker of a party different from his own that was anything but a delightful person. But my question is really, who are all those people behind the table scrutinizing who I am, when I come in to go vote? Who are they all? Who are all those people? How did they get chosen to be back there? The group of people standing behind there are completely different now than they were before COVID. Did my people die? Did they get too old? Who are these people?
It's Dave.
How'd they get there?
They signed up. They came to our website or they came to our office and said, I want to be an election judge. And we said, all right, you go through this 3-hour training and we will tell you what you need to do. And we will place you with other people that are interested in doing what you want to do. They get assigned to polling places, usually based on the area that they live in. Although sometimes there's places where we have hard time finding people, so we ask them to travel across the county to go work there. But I think Dave is a great example. He lives in Southern Boone. He works at the Ashland Optimist Club. And the people that he works with are also usually from Ashland, although sometimes We do send people from Columbia down to him. And if you see anybody that's very young, those are our youth election participants. Those are people that have been nominated from their schools or have reached out to us and said, hey, I'm 15, I'm 16 years old, and I'm interested in working at a polling place, and they become a youth election participant. So lots of times, technically under the statute says that each political party, the Democratic Central Committee and the Republican Central Committee, are supposed to give us names. They're supposed to nominate people. That very rarely happens anywhere in Missouri. So we recruit. We go to Kiwanis meetings and anywhere we're invited to talk about how fun it is to be an election judge. Dave is our unofficial cheerleader for being an election judge. And once you're signed up, you go through a training before each election. You get sworn in as an election judge that you're going to do everything and uphold the law. We give you a bunch of checklists and directions to follow. And at the end of the night, they're the ones that bring back the results to our office. And you get paid. Yes, Dave, I always forget to tell people they get paid because everybody thinks it's a volunteer situation, but you get paid for both the training and you get paid for the day that you work. You get paid a little. A few $100s.
So I'm interested in the answer to Dave's question in the chat about is there going to be any recount or any further action on Prop 1 because it was so close?
So it obviously is very close. If the way that Missouri law is written is there is what is called an automatic recount statute. That is not a recount where I initiate a recount. It is a recount where somebody would have to go to court, just file a petition. They don't have to prove any evidence or anything because it's an automatic recount, but they do need to take the step of going to the court and saying to the court, hey, this fell within the 1% margin. As a result, we're entitled to a recount. I would like a recount. They can do that. The court would tell us what type of recount, how to do it, the timing of it, and all those things. If somebody wants to do that, they have 30 days from the date of certification, and we certified on Monday, so they have 30 days from Monday, which I think is September 8th.
Wow.
We would do whatever the court asked us to do. I had one call the day after Election Day that asked me how that process worked and what would be involved. And since then, I have not heard anything else. I try to kind of monitor social media, like any of my own social media, to just see if there's anybody talking about things. I've seen a little bit of chatter about it, but I have not officially heard anything. And I don't know if anybody would even give me a heads up before they did it. But I don't think the city's heard anything either. YEPs are the youth election participants.
We usually try to recognize if anyone here is a candidate or serving in office. Of course, our guest is serving in office, or a member of the press. I don't think we have any of anybody else in that category here today. I'm hoping that the press people will watch our video of this so that they can see what's on Brianna's mind at this point. And of course, they know how to call her when they want. Whether or not they will accurately report what she tells them, that's another matter, of course, especially on complicated matters. So I think hearing nothing further, I will, on behalf of Muleskinners, thank Brianna for being with us again. It's a very important kind of season that we're in. And we know that you've told us how things can happen very quickly in the next few weeks or not. And and so we will, we may have to ask you to come explain something again, but we hope there'll be a good November season once again for the clerk's office.
I'm happy to come back whenever or answer any questions. Reach out anytime.
Great. Thank you. And now let's move on to our announcements. Everybody's certainly welcome to stick around for our officers meeting today. It's going to be